Coming up today, prosecutors investigating the bribery case that's gripping the nation have detained the right-hand man of the deceased businessman at the heart of the scandal. The aide is being held on suspicion of destroying evidence. The government announces its plans to raise the sunken Soho ferry. If everything goes according to plan, the salvage operation will begin in September. Plus, Korea marks the first international co-production of its trainer fighter jet with Peru, as Seoul looks to provide more defense-related material to South America. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello, it's noon on Wednesday, the 22nd of April. You're tuned in to our midday newscast here on Arirang TV. It's great to have you with us. I'm Mark Broom. Our top story this afternoon, the probe into the bribery list scandal is picking up a head of steam. Prosecutors have arrested, without a formal warrant as yet, the closest aide of recently deceased businessman Sung Woan-jong on charges of destroying evidence. Park Ji-won reports.
Prosecutors arrested the closest aide of late businessman Sung Woan-jong in the early hours of Wednesday morning after an interrogation that went deep into the night. Park Jun-ho, who was also a former executive member of Sung's company, Keangnam Enterprises, was arrested on suspicion of destroying evidence. Park is facing charges of turning off surveillance cameras and hiding company documents when prosecutors raided the company's offices last month and a second time last week. The prosecution believes Park could hold the key to their probe into the bribery list scandal as he managed Sung's political affairs for well over a decade. Meanwhile, Keangnam Enterprises, which Sung took over in 2003, is now under court receivership. The projected losses to its creditors, subcontractors, and investors are expected to reach roughly $1 billion. According to financial industry sources, a total of 17 financial institutions have lent a combined $1.24 billion to the now insolvent company. Out of the total, some $680 million is considered non-collectible. Over 1,600 subcontractors are also expected to bear a loss about $230 million, with Keangnam Enterprises delisted from the stock market last week. Individual and institutional investors lost about $110 million. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
The graft scandal will also be the focus of a meeting between the floor leaders of Korea's two main rival parties this afternoon. The two leaders are expected to discuss whether to launch an investigation by an independent counsel into Prime Minister Lee Kwang-gu, who offered his resignation this week amid the snowballing scandal. The Prime Minister, close aides of President Park Geun-hye, and lawmakers from both parties are accused of receiving bribes from deceased business tycoon Sung Woan-jong. At the meeting, the leaders are also expected to discuss a compromise on reforming the civil servant pension system and pending livelihood bills. The Korean government has decided to salvage the Soho ferry, which sank off Korea's southwestern coast in April last year. At a press conference around an hour ago, the Public Safety Ministry said it plans to start the salvage operation in September. A special team dedicated to the operation will be formed, and their first task will be selecting a company for the job. The Maritime Minister, who was also present at the conference, said the whole process could take up to 18 months and emphasized that the government will continue to communicate with the bereaved families during the operation. The Soho ferry is remembered as the most tragic accident in Korea last year, and for many years it left some 300 passengers dead, most of them high school students. President Park Geun-hye is now in Chile, the third leg of her four-nation tour of South America. Before departing Peru on Tuesday local time, she celebrated the first joint production of Korea's very own trainer jet, the KT-1P with the Peruvian government. Our Chae-sun reports.
Korea's very own trainer jet, the KT-1P, got off the ground and into the Peruvian sky. A ceremony on Tuesday marked the first local production of this jet by Korea Aerospace Industries and Peru as part of a $200 million deal to help the South American country acquire 20 KT-1Ps. President Park Geun-hye praised efforts from both sides, saying Seoul and Lima should focus more on win-win partnerships in all areas from aviation, the economy to culture.
앞으로 양국이 상생과 공동 번영의 미래를 향해 더욱 다양한 분야에서 협력을 증진시켜 나가기를 기대합니다.
Peruvian President Ollanta Humala expressed optimism that their technical cooperation will lead to making a supersonic multi-purpose advanced trainer jet. In fact, Korean officials say it could pave the way for Korea to export more advanced aircraft and defense supplies throughout South America. With a reputation of being a reliable partner, Korea has gained the interest of countries like Ecuador and Paraguay to develop their defense capabilities. A 2012 export deal with Peru led to similar agreements beyond South America in Iraq and the Philippines. Also on Tuesday, President Park held talks with the mayor of Lima, where she requested support for Korea's participation in the planning of Peru's river restoration and public infrastructure projects. President Park Geun-hye has arrived in Chile for the third stop of her South America tour. On Wednesday, she will seek ways to diversify bilateral economic cooperation with Chilean President Michelle Bachelet. Before her first official day, President Park met Koreans residing in the country, where she asked them to continue to help building a bridge between Korea and Chile. She also pledged support to meet their needs. Chae-sun, Arirang News, Santiago.
South Korea and the United States have concluded a new bilateral nuclear cooperation agreement to replace the current outdated one, which has been in place since 1974. South Korea's chief negotiator, Park No-byuk, and U.S. Ambassador to South Korea Mark Lippert will initial the agreement at 4:15 today at Seoul's Foreign Ministry. We'll have more details on that in our later newscast. Now, Korea has slammed a group of Japanese lawmakers for paying their respects at a highly controversial war shrine in Tokyo. Japan's Kyodo news agency reported that a bipartisan group of Japanese politicians visited the Yasukuni shrine earlier today as Japan marks its annual Spring Festival. An official at Seoul's Foreign Ministry said the act goes against international norms. The shrine honors Japan's war dead, including 14 convicted Class A war criminals, and trips there by Japanese leaders anger Korea and China, victims of Japan's past militarism. The visit comes a matter of hours before Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is set to give a speech at the Asian-African Conference in Jakarta. The Korean government has hired a US PR firm to promote its position on Japan's wartime history ahead of Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's speech to US Congress next week. The Wall Street Journal reported Tuesday that the Washington-based company, which doesn't want to be named quite yet at least, is tasked with presenting Korea's position on disagreements between Seoul and Tokyo over their shared history. The paper quoted a company executive who said their job was to, quote, make sure reporters who hear Abe speak understand what he is not saying. The move comes amid concerns that Abe won't acknowledge or apologize for Japan's wartime past. An official from Korea's foreign ministry said the move is part of efforts to strengthen existing public relations work in light of Abe's speech. Abe is scheduled to address US Congress on April 29th. Japan plans to require the United States hold prior consultations with it when the US uses its armed forces in certain circumstances when the two countries update their bilateral defense cooperation guidelines later this month. Japan's Kyodo news agency reported on Tuesday that both sides agreed to stipulate a measure that requires Washington to confer with Tokyo before making any arms decision when there is an explicit danger that could threaten Japan's security. Now, this plan is being interpreted by Korea as Tokyo's effort to expand its military leverage in the region, including the Korean Peninsula. Washington and Tokyo are currently working on revising their 1997 defense cooperation guidelines that are expected to be finalized by the two nations' foreign and defense ministers in Washington next Monday. The United States is urging Pyongyang to show some level of cooperation before the two sides open a new round of negotiations on a peaceful resolution to the North Korean nuclear issue. Speaking at the Council on Foreign Relations on Tuesday, U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs Daniel Russell says that thus far North Korea is unwilling to negotiate with Washington. He also said that while China has tremendous leverage to influence North Korea, it is also deeply worried about a messy implosion or collapse. Russell said Washington and Beijing hope North Korean leader Kim Jong-un will take a path similar to Iran and see that the nuclear path his country is taking is a dead end. Now, a British veteran of the Korean War had a very emotional day in Seoul on Tuesday. Bill Speakman, the only living Victoria Cross holder from the war, presented his medals here to the people of South Korea. Mr. Speakman was awarded the VC, the highest military decoration bestowed by the United Kingdom, for his bravery in a battle against the Chinese military on South Korean soil in 1951. The 87-year-old, who's currently on a visit, said donating the medals for display in South Korea was the sensible thing to do. He added that he wants his ashes to be scattered over the demilitarized zone.
I can't express myself any further. It's just because you don't really know how I feel about this. But my ashes will be here.
Mr. Speakman said he was proud of how Korea recovered from the war and became the economic powerhouse that it is today. He also said he wanted Korea's future generations to see what the war was all about. More than 1,000 British military personnel lost their lives during the Korean War. Now, despite efforts to boost employment here in Korea, a large number of young people are still without work. Experts say tackling the problem will require the combined efforts of the government and the private sector, but that social attitudes also need to change. In the first of a two-part series, our Shin Se-min gives us an overview of the issue.
Park Sara is just 2 months out of college, and she's already worried about unemployment. Although it's relatively early for her to consider herself one of the thousands of young people in Korea who are unemployed, she says she already feels the pressure.
I never thought I'd be one of those people who are worried about not being employed. The fact that I'm part of the unemployed group makes me feel like I'm no different, and it makes me feel discouraged.
Park isn't alone. In fact, she is one of more than 450,000 young people in Korea hoping to get a job. It is a problem countless others face because of a serious imbalance in supply and demand within the youth job market, with an overabundance of highly educated potential workers and not enough high-quality jobs.
With many companies deciding to freeze hiring this year, more job seekers will remain unemployed. And as most people with college degrees hope to get jobs at large companies with high wages, better benefits at job security, it looks like the youth and unemployment rate will continue to rise for some time.
Experts say the government needs to develop policies for tackling youth unemployment. However, that's not the only strategy that needs to be adopted. Experts also stress the need to change the social attitude towards career options. They say one way to improve youth unemployment is to show students that ultra-competitive conglomerate jobs aren't the only way to achieve the quality of life they desire. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Korea's finance minister says the government will join talks on a US-led regional free trade agreement known as TPP or Trans-Pacific Partnership. Minister Choi Kyung-hwan said the current round of talks are nearing their end, so Seoul cannot take part, but after that's settled, it will engage in the next round of negotiations. Choi added that the US welcomes Korea's plan. TPP negotiations are ongoing after an extended break due to differences between Japan and the US over tariffs on agricultural products, intellectual property and automobiles. Seoul and Washington have held 3 rounds of preliminary talks since Korea expressed an interest in joining the trade pact in 2013. When signed, the TPP is expected to create one of the world's largest economic blocs involving 12 countries. Saudi Arabia says its bombing campaign in Yemen is over. A Saudi-led coalition has been bombing Iran-allied Houthi rebels for nearly a month now. The country says the alliance has achieved its military goals and will now begin a new operation focused on finding a political solution to the crisis in Yemen. Our Sung Woan-jong has more.
Speaking at a news conference in Riyadh on Tuesday, a spokesman for the Saudi-led coalition targeting the rebels in Yemen declared an end to the airstrike campaign it began 4 weeks ago.
Today, the leadership of the coalition has announced that it has ended the decisive storm operation in accordance with the request by the Yemen government and the president.
The spokesman said the campaign against Iran-backed Shiite rebels in Yemen known as Houthis had achieved its military goals, adding that the rebels no longer pose a threat to civilians in the region. The U.S.-backed bombing campaign by the Gulf Arab allies began on March 26 after the Houthi rebels, who have taken over large parts of the country, forced the Yemeni President Abdul Rabb Mansour Hadi to flee the country. The alliance said it will launch a new operation called Restoring Hope that will focus on rebuilding Yemen while preventing the rebels from undertaking any operations inside the country. The focus of the new operation will be on finding a political solution to the conflict. But the Saudi spokesman also said they will not rule out airstrikes if deemed necessary. The World Health Organization said the violence in Yemen has killed nearly 1,000 people, more than 300 of them civilians, since the airstrike campaign began. 손정인, Arirang News.
Well, that's all we have for you at this hour. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Goodbye.